there is a category in the Mishnah which is called Yemei HaKnisa. Yemei HaKnisa means in a time and a place where people lived in villages where they had no minyan, on the one hand. And there was a minhag that they used to come in on Mondays and Thursdays for market days. So the days before Purim, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel were called Yemei HaKnisa. So for example, if Purim were Sunday, so the people who came from the Kfarim, they would read it Yud Aleph, the Thursday before. If Purim were Shabbos or Purim were Wednesday, then they would read it the Thursday or the Monday before, which would be Yud Beis, which would be today. If Purim were Tuesday or Purim were Friday, then they would read it Yud Gimel, one day before. It's called Yom HaKnis. So as it turns out, Megillah the Kras, there's 5 days when we read the Megillah. The Rebbe brings that there's a day that you can read it from the beginning of the Chodesh, but there's 5 days with the Megillah, which is interesting. The reason it's interesting is, I talked about it a little bit on Friday, and I don't know how useful these ideas are, because I'm sort of thinking them as I go along, but Purim is one day. Purim is like Yom Kippur. But there's a big difference between the one day of Yom Kippur and the one day of Purim. The one day of Purim is called Yemei HaPurim. There's at least 2 one days. Everybody has one day, but everybody has their own day. You live in Shushan Habira, your one day is Chamisha Asar, your Tezvot. If you live in the cities that are Perazim, Yemei Yeshua Ben Nun, then you read it on your Dalet. And Yemei HaKnisa, you read it on your Gimel, you read it on your Beis, you read it on your Aleph. So the way I think about it, it's like a personal Yom Kippur. This is the thought that I'm suggesting. Yom Kippur is Achas Bashana. Yom Kippur is one day a year. And this is determined by the Eibishter, it's determined by the Sanhedrin. And all Yidden have one Yom Kippur. And there's no such thing, I'm not ready for Yom Kippur yet, or can I do Yom Kippur early? Yom Kippur is Achas Bashana. And the Purim is also Achas Bashana. But Purim and Achas Bashana has their own Achas. In other words, if you want to use Isis, it's a Yechida, but you're Yechida. It's a Dvar Teireh. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it makes sense. But this is what I've been thinking, and this is what I'm sharing. Today is Sunday, and I want to thank you for coming, even though it's only 9:30 in the morning, whatever it is, on the old clock. And we're learning Tanya, Kedat Keinu. Tanya, we try not to skip. And we're learning Perigid Gimel, chapter 13. How are we understanding chapter 13? How are we understanding Perigid Gimel? We're understanding Perigid Gimel, to use an old expression, as turning over all the stones. The Tanya started with a bunch of kashas. For us, that's probably 4 years ago. Tanya probably started for us 4 years ago. And we didn't answer the kashas. We went on to talk about a whole bunch of other things. Most notably, or most significantly, the kashas that we had in Tanya were based on Gemaras. For the most part, Mamor Chazal, Gemara, Nigla, the Tanya. Even though the Sefer Tanya Kadisha is a Sefer that has to do with Pnimiyas HaTorah. I tell this to you all the time. The Yesod of the Tanya is Araya Mehemne Pashas Mishpat. The Yesod of the Tanya is Nishara Kedusha Meharacha, which the Alter Rebbe brings at the end of the first page. The Tanya is not explaining Tzadik Bein Nirosh Api Alocha and Api Nigla. The Tzadik is explaining Tzadik Bein Nirosh Api Chsidus and Api Kabbalah, right? In other words, the Tanya is not giving us the Shema Mushal of Tzadik Bein Nirosh. The Tanya is giving us the Shema Torah of Tzadik Bein Nirosh. So like I said, the Rebbe started with Gemaras, the Alter Rebbe. And then after he wrote all the Gemaras, then he says, let's learn Kabbalah. He mentions that I'm Mehemne the Zoyar, then he brings Shara Gedusha and the Eitz Chaim. And we went on to talk about Tzadik Bein Nirosha, not B'Shem HaMushal, as it says, which is based on judgment. Tzadik Bein Nirosha, based on the way you're treated in a court of law. But Shem Mateyin, Mahus Madregas Tzadik, Mahus Madregas Beinin, Mahus Madregas Rosh. And I guess we should add Mahus Madregas Baal Tshuva. And it took Alter Rebbe a long time. And the last Perek, we finally got to Madregas HaBeinini, and we learned with Hashem's help Perek Yud Beis. And if you were here, you know that the code word from Adregas Beinani is Melucha and Memshala. That's how I taught it to you. It's based on the Rebbe's Rishima. I really believe it's based on the Rebbe's Rishima. In other words, Chabasnish Bar Shafen, and it's also Karev Lanu. And Perek Yud Gimel is going back to Perek Aleph. All the Gemaras that the Rebbe asked about, he's now going to address one by one. I remember listening to the Rebbe's Rashi Sichas. I grew up by the Rebbe's Rashi Sichas. So the first thing I can tell you about the Rebbe's Rashi Sichas is that when the Rebbe used to ask Kashas, you would say, this week, he's not getting out of it. These Kashas have no terutzim. How many times did I have that experience? 100 times. On a Guzman. The Rebbe was asking Kashas. On a Rashi, 3 words of Rashi, 30 questions by the Rebbe. Believe Guzman. No way. Yeah? Then the Rebbe used to make a break. It was a hefsek. And he gave mashke. So it was a long time for us to tell ourselves how it's impossible for the Rebbe to fix this. All over the Zal, while they were giving mashke, the Bachrim were schmoozing about the Rashis or the Rambam, whatever it was that was on our mind. Anyway, then the Rebbe would say, B'negei the Pirush Rashi ala Torah, and he would speak 15 seconds about that Guzman. And he would say, the problem is we're looking at the Rashi incorrectly, and he would give you a chiropractic adjustment. Click. And then you would say, oh my God, it's so simple. How I didn't think of it? But you never thought of it. You understand? You had this experience 100 times, and you never came up with the Rebbe's chap. You know why? Because you're not Rashi. But then, the Rebbe would show you the new way to look at the Rashi. And then, depending on how much time he had, he would go back and answer every question. A lot of the questions, sometimes the Rebbe would say, Tein lachocham v'yech kamoid, you can figure it out by yourself, it's self-explanatory. But if the Rebbe had time, and b'dicha daitik vayochel, he would go back and answer all the questions. And when he did that, on the one hand, you said, I'll figure it out myself. On the other hand, when he did it, you would hear new chedushim that you would never have thought of. In other words, how the Rebbe would answer all the questions. So here's a Sefer Tanya Kadisha, where the Alter Rebbe asked a bunch of questions, and then he went off to talk a whole inyan al Piptimis and Yonim Mitzadik Beinani Rosha, and now he's going back to answer the questions in the first Perek. And last week we did the first one. And he's not necessarily going in the order of the kashas. So the Gemara in Brachis, Tzadikim Yetzatev Sheftan, the Shoym Yetzara Sheftan, Beinim Zevadeh Sheftan. My children are learning Tanya now, asking me about it. Why is it Tzadik only Yetzatev Sheftan? So I tell them it has to be Tzadik Gomer. Because Tzadik Sheini Gomer, Lached has another Shefet. When it says the Shoym Yetzara Sheftan, Lached has to be Rasha Gomer, because the Rasha Vatevli is the Malay Mecharotas. Beinim Zevadeh Sheftan, and the Alter Rebbe told us last week, V'lein Meishlan Chas V'Shalom. Beinim Zevadeh Sheftan, God forbid to think that this means that the Beinani has 2 rulers. Because if a Beinani has 2 rulers, that means he's a Rasha. And a Beinani is not a Rasha for one moment. So the Taich, Beinim Zevadeh Sheftan, means that there's 2 voices, but he only listens to one and he never listens to the other. Why? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Eibishter helps, like it says, the Gemara brings this. Ki yamed limin evin lishia misheftei nafshei, the Eibishter helps the Beinani, because he's poor to defeat his sheftei nafshei, the other judge of his nefesh. This was last week's class. And there were a couple of diyukim in last week's class. One is that the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the idea that a Beinani will not be a Beinani without Hashem's help is not true when the Beinani is in a state of melucha. When the Beinani is in a state of melucha, then Kayachal helps himself because he's aroused with Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. The idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is when the Beinani is, quote, only, end quote, in a state of Memshala, his Yetzer Hara is on, his Yetzer Teva is on, and the reason he's overcoming his Yetzer Hara is also 2 reasons. One is Me'ach Shalat Al Alev, where the Rebbe says, Me'ach Shalat Al Alev is a Teva of the Nefesh HaBahamas, as I keep on telling you. So you have the help of the Shimu from the davening that he did before. And the other is Yisay Na'er Mitech HaCheisha. Kedusha and Klipa are not 2 equal and opposite enemies. It's light and darkness. And when light meets darkness, it's a no-brainer. It's not a contest. For this second inyan, this is what the Alter Rebbe says. That when it comes to the idea that when the Nefesh Elokis, when the person is faced with a question of Lichtigkeit and Finster, something real and something not real, here, the reason the Beinani wins every time is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezek Yamed Liyamin Evyein Liishia Misheftei Nafshei. This is last week's class. Ad Kan Chazor. We're starting Ach. How many lines from the bottom of the page is it? It's 10 lines from the bottom of Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, which would mean page 35 using English numbers. Ach, however, me'acher, whereas, considering the fact that the evil which presides in the left side of the heart of the Beinani, who is just as hard as it was when the Beinani was born. To desire taiva, and again, you know how I translate the word. Taiva means weakness. Taiva means things that make you and me buckle at the knees, that steals our self-control. That's what taiva means. And that's why the Indian from Eskafi with Varim Amutorim, this is a Hayem Yem. The Talmidat Morazok made a Achlata. As was as will, so man nicht haben. If I want something, I shouldn't have it. And it wasn't because they believed in suffering, they believed in masochism. It was because Mishum Bittel HaTaiva, that's the Lashon. They wanted to break Taiva. Taiva means weakness. The Yetzer Hara wants to make us weak. I can do something which is hard and meaningful. I can do something which is easy and superficial. This is Nefesh HaLekis. This is Nefesh HaBahamis. And to win the Yetzer Teiv, to win the Nefesh HaBahamis every time is a huge milchama. You need a lot of avodah, and a lot of discipline, and a lot of iskafia, and a lot of support. Says the Rebbe, to all the desires of the pleasures of the world. And he would not refer to the ra in the left side of the heart as being bottled in its insignificance in relationship with the Teiv. And certainly not. It wasn't pushed from its place completely. So now, Nizbatel b'mi'at l'gabi ateiv would be tzaddik v'rale, right? Lo nitcham mimkei klal would be tzaddik v'toivla. You follow? You understand? You agree with the definitions. So now let's use our muscle. This is a city. Over here there's a fortress, and over here there's a fortress. In the middle there's a city. Over here is Nefesh HaLekis. Over here is Nefesh HaBahamis.
Okay, the children are coming.
The Nefesh HaLekis, which is here, wants to take over the city. The Bahamas, which is here, wants to take over the city. But what they really want is not just to take over the city. They want to invade the opposite fortress and displace the king of that fortress and rule over the other palace. If the Nefesh HaLekis successfully takes over the city and it goes into the other palace and pushes Nefesh HaBahamis out, does it tzaddik go? If he doesn't push him out, but he puts him into a corner and he has him cowering and quiet, Kafaf Lateiv, that would be a tzaddik. She'enigam. If the other way around, this guy, the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh HaBahamis, takes over the city and enters into the palace of the Nefesh HaLekis, and he's cowering over the Nefesh HaLekis. If the Nefesh HaLekis occasionally screams and speaks, that's called a Tza'arasha B'Teileh. If he manages to quiet the Nefesh HaLekis, the Nefesh HaLekis has no charata, no regret whatsoever, that's a Rosh Hashanah. So the Alter Rebbe says, when you talk about a Beinani, the Beinani, his seat of strength is the Mayach, and the Tzad HaYamin Shabalev, which is the Mokum Mishkan of Shalakis, and it takes over the whole city. And he wants to enter into the other palace, and he says he hasn't. And he brings both levels. Let's read the words again. Lein is battle b'mi'at l'gabi ateiv, which would be that he's entered into the fortress of the Nefesh HaBahamis and quieted him enough that he shouldn't actually get you to do wrong things, even though there's wrong inside of you, which would be tzaddik v'rale. And for sure, we're not dealing with an instant where he has completely pushed the evil out of that fortress, which would be the madrega of tzaddik gomor. Says the Rabbi Raknor v'jaden she'ein le'ishlitu memshala le'espashet b'yevrei aguf. The Nefesh HaBahamis sits in his fortress, and in his place, to use a great new age, socially sensitive word, he emotes. What a great American word. He emotes. He expresses his feelings. He emotes. So he emotes. He says whatever he feels. The ganze Welt hat wissen, was feel. But nobody listens to what he wants. He emotes. All of his feelings are coming out. But when it comes to actual practice, in the city itself, on the level of machshava, dibur, or ma'isa, on the behavioral level, he's never listened to. Listen to. Vavos mipnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Tayachol, the Eibishter, is a Eimed Liyamin. Having the same pasuk we had a minute ago, that stands on the right side of the Evin, of the impoverished one. Ve'ezer, and he assists. Umeir, and he shines light. L'nefesh Elokis, to the divine soul. So that you should never listen to the Nefesh HaBahamis. Now you have to understand that the word Umeir, shines light, in this case is a very, it's not light the way you would understand light in convention. Light in convention means a lichtigkeit, it means a force, it means an inspiration, it means a warmth, it means some kind of a joy even, yeah? This Umeir is really, you know what it is? It's Pintel Yid in a hidden state. That's how we're referring to it. It's the Teva of the Neshama. The Teva of the Neshama is Elokus. Remember, we have two Tevas in Tanya. Remember how many times have I discussed this? You have two Tevas in Tanya. You have the Teva of the Nefesh HaBahamis with its limitations, and you have the Teva of the Nefesh Elokis, which is going to be discussed IYH in Yitzhak Hashem. In chapter 19, in Perek Yud Tes, that this Teva is L'mayla B'Tamadas. Kol Dovo Shein B'Chinus Tamadas. The Neshama's Teva attached to Hashem is that he nishta vil, nishta kon, neither he wishes to nor is able to become Karaf HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Yid and the Eibishter, the Yid and the Elokus are one. So when this Teva is revealed, that's Mesiras Nefesh, that's Tshuva. When this Teva is hidden, it's not very strong, but it's strong enough that when you have a Mishkal HaShava, the Nefesh Elokis is sitting over here and screaming, the Shemab is sitting over here and screaming, and in the city you don't hear that much of the noise. In other words, they're not invading their space. In other words, we're not talking about Avedas Tzaddik, we're not talking about Avedas Rashi, we're talking about Avedas Beinani. What makes the Beinani do the right thing every time and do the wrong thing 0 times is because of this subliminal help. And it says here, Umeya l'nefesh elokis, it shines to the divine soul. You're talking about a shining, and again, I'm using my own words now, it's Yechida in a state of katnus. It's the Teva of the Neshama. In Tanya it's called Chochma Shebenefesh. There's no Yechida in Tanya B'chlal. The Chochma Shebenefesh in a katnus state. You see, if this Chochma Shebenefesh would be in a godless state, there'd be no contest. It'd be over. Because there's no Liyumazet to Yechida Shebenefesh. But the Yechida is in a Teva state. It's in a hidden state. But we're talking about a Beinani. A Beinani means Le'over V'Le'yavid, a Vedas he never did. And because we're talking about a Beinis, this Teva is considered enough light, he uses the word oil, for the Nefesh Elokis to defeat the Nefesh HaBahamis each time. So let's talk it over. There is the moments of Melucha, when a Beinani davent, he's a king, that's not even a question. Obviously at that time, he's like a tzaddik. But then there's the rest of his life when he's only a Moishel, Menshala, Shlita. And of course we have the two possibilities. Number one, Me'ashal ala Leiv, the Teva of the Nefesh HaBahamis, with the help of a Rishon of the Tefillah that he did before. And number two, because it's a contest between Ayel and Chayshah. And when it comes to this number two, that a Jew is given two choices, a right choice and an expedient choice. It's not, this is good and this is good, this is good and this is lazy, but I'm lazy. I mean, that's the reality. For this, there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezer. The Eibush gives you enough help that even though they're equal, that you should do the correct thing and not do the lazy thing. What is the nature of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezer? What does he say? HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eimed Liyamin Evyin Hashem. I'm 7 lines to the bottom of the page. He stands on the right side of the one who is poor. That means a Yid in a state of Shlita and Menshala. Ve'ezer, and he supports. Umeya l'nefesh elokis, and he shines a light. Understand that this light, which is being described here, is not the way you would expect the light to be described. It's not a force. It's an almost imperceptible voice. It's the Teva of the Neshama, which is one with the Eibush in a state of katnus, but in a Beinani it's enough. In a Beinani it's enough. So the Rebbe says, Lochei, now we explain another Gemara. Nikra Kirosha. This is why a Beinani is called Kirosha. The Tanya begins with the question, right? Afilu kala Tanya v'seif v'negimul right? Mashbiya noisi tzaddik al tirosha. That's number one. We'll get to that in Mitzvah Hashem in the next page. Tzaddik al tirosha. The next page. Yedallah. Then it says, everybody that you know that's part of the Helam Behester of Olam, says to you, you're a tzaddik, you should be, you're a tzaddik. It says in the Mishnah, it's not correct that a person should see himself as bad. Right? And if he'll do it, he's going to be depressed. And depression is a sure way to lose the tzedakah. What's worse than Yeda Lavove? And when it comes to Kalus, all bets are off, correct? So why would a person here be ein of Kid Rasha? So the Alter Rebbe explains now. Like it says in the Chazal, the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik. You should perceive yourself as Kid Rasha. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'lei Rasha Mamish. The Gemara doesn't say you should say I'm a bad person. The Gemara says you should say I'm a vulnerable person. Kid Rasha is a noun. It's not Kid Moy Rasha. It's a noun. It's an entity. There's a tzaddik, there's a Rasha, and there's a Kid Rasha. What's a Kid Rasha? Someone who doesn't do what a Rasha does, but he's vulnerable to the inyanim to which a Rasha is vulnerable to. I told you this a few times. I don't know if you're supposed to say this in a shir, say this or not. I really don't. But I just think the word is gewaltig. There was a Jew, a goy, an African, yeah? His name was Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is, I think you could call him Chassid Yom Zayulam without a question. I really do. Nelson Mandela. The number of lives that he saved and the amount of good that he brought to the world by his constraint is pashat historic. The Chazal say, but I think it's Chassid Yom Zayulam. I believe that. Anyway, he died, he was very old. So for the first time in years, I put on the radio. I wanted to hear what had to say about Nelson Mandela. And one of the quotes that I repeated many times was that somebody said, there was a quote from an earlier talk, somebody said to him, Mr. Mandela, you're a saint. So he says, I'm not a saint. Unless a saint means a sinner who never stops trying. Unless a saint means a sinner, that's like a Kid Rasha. Now, a sinner, I did Averis. Kid Rasha doesn't mean I did Averis. I'm vulnerable to Averis. I could do an Averis. You understand? V'lei Rasha mamish, not Chazkom is Rasha. And I want to give you a clarification. One of the things about the Tanya is, the Tanya is Sefer, the Baruch Meshach, said that the Tanya is Sefer HaSeichel. The Baruch Meshach is one of the strongest spirits of the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe met him, Alter Rebbe said to him, I don't understand why you're so upset about my derech. You said about my Sefer, Tanya Kadisha, the Baruch Meshach, Tanya is Sefer HaSeichel. Yeah, I think we would call the Tanya the Sefer HaEmes. An emes has two sides. You don't build yourself up, but you don't smash yourself down. A Beinani's not a liar. A Beinani's not a shofel. I'm a doormat, a scoop on the dresses. I'm not nothing. A Beinani knows he's a Beinani. And if a Beinani has never done an Aveda in his life, or for every Aveda he's done tshuva, he knows he's a Beinani. And that's the emes. If was the Taich Kid Rasha, I could not be a Beinani in a minute from now. He has to construe himself, imagine himself as a Beinani, and not to believe the Oilam. Right? So what's a Taich Oilam? The world which is concealed and lazy. That are telling him that the evil in him has been bittled. Says the Rebbe, that's the level of tzaddik, and he's not a tzaddik. The person's view of himself, we're talking about a Beinani. The Beinani's view of himself could be as though the substance and essence of the evil, who in all of its hardness and all of its strength, it continues to reside in his fortress over here, on the left side. Kitelda says when he was born, he has not been replaced, or departed from this person, any of it. So he's as much vulnerable to an Aveda today as he was when he was a little boy. Moreover, as we age, Yitzhahara gets stronger. Most people tell me you get older, Yitzhahara gets weaker. I think what gets weaker is the ability to do an Aveda, but not the desire to do an Aveda. Nischazik Yesed, it becomes stronger behemshech hazman as time passes, because shenishtamish beharbe, one has used his nefesh habahamit and his yetzer more ba'achila and eating, u'shtzia and drinking, u'sha'ad inyonei elam hazeh, and more matters of this world. And I am going to apologize and stop.